Good afternoon and welcome to the American Floral Endowment's Grow Pro webinar series. I am your moderator, Karen Schneck. I'm a member of the AFE's Young Professionals Council and a senior research specialist in live goods R&D at Scott's Miracle-Gro. I coordinate the annual flower trials for the Scott's Miracle-Gro and Bonnie Plants flower programs. I received my bachelor's and master's in ornamental horticulture from Kansas State University. Today's session is on the current status and recommendations for soilless growing media. On behalf of the endowment, I am excited to be a part of AFE's Grow Pro webinar series that features a new topic every month presented by an industry expert. The webinars are free to everyone thanks to the generous support of AFE's sponsors. This session is sponsored by Pinstrup. Pinstrup is one of the world's leading producers of high-quality substrates for professional growers. Customers in more than 100 countries have chosen Pinstrup as their preferred supplier of growing media. With more than 100 years of experience in the peat business and 5 decades of supplying substrates to the horticultural and agriculture industries, customers can rely on Pinstrup for a consistent, high-quality product every time. If you'd like to learn more about our sponsors, or if you are a supplier and interested in becoming a sponsor for a topic, you can find that information and more about the webinar series on AFE's website at endowment.org/growpro. Today's session was pre-recorded in English by Dr. Brian Jackson. After the presentation, Dr. Jackson will join us for a Q&A. Feel free to submit your questions through the Q&A feature or chat anytime. We'll answer as many as we can before the end of the hour. Unanswered questions may be answered through a separate email exchange. This session is being recorded and will be shared to AFE's YouTube account. Through YouTube's accessibility features, you can access closed captioning in other languages. To get us started, I'd like to share a bit about today's expert speaker, Dr. Brian Jackson. Brian is a professor of horticulture and director of the Horticultural Substrates Laboratory at North Carolina State University. He has studied and researched soilless substrates for horticultural crop production systems since 2003, with an emphasis on designing and characterizing engineered wood and bark materials. In addition to being a leading global expert in the engineering and use of wood substrate materials, Brian is also heavily involved in national and global substrate initiatives, advocacy groups, substrate manufacturer consultations, and multidisciplinary scientific collaborations. He writes and speaks frequently across various in-person and virtual platforms to educate growers and other consumers of growing media about new advances and techniques in substrate science. Dr. Jackson, welcome and thank you for presenting today on the current status and recommendations for soilless growing media.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brian Jackson, a professor at NC State University. And first and foremost, I want to thank the American Floral Endowment for the opportunity to present my second webinar as part of the Grow Pro series, the first being about 3 years ago, and on a similar topic to this one. And what I want to spend some time talking about today is sharing with you some of my perspectives and some of the latest research, and also some of what growers are facing as far as challenges and opportunities as it relates to growing media and soilless substrates for crop production. So with that being said, also an initial thank you to Pinstrup for sponsoring this webinar. Pinstrup, one of many very well-known substrate companies and media providers here in the United States, and good friends of mine as well. So topics for today. Now, we have 30 to 40 minutes, and that is a good amount of time to cover some of the new topics, the issues in the news, the media that our growers are facing, not only domestically but also internationally. So I'm going to take this time to share with you some snapshots, okay, of what I'm seeing. We will not get too much in detail, which is pretty much my MO for giving these types of talks. My goal is for you to have a better perspective or to generate some ideas and questions that then can be followed up later, either with me or someone else. Okay, so that's my objective and goal for you all today. So first, we're going to look back before we go looking forward, and I'll explain that just a bit more in detail. I will provide then just a few glimpses into the state of the growing media industry as I see them today. Of course, not being able to cover everything. Wood keeps working. We'll talk about wood fiber and engineered wood products and their continued interest and role in today's growing media for ornamental crop production. Some other innovations and trends. A lot of neat trends and innovations are occurring not by industry professionals or academics, but by growers. There are a lot of things that the last 3 years have done in hardships and supply and demand and supply chain issues that growers stepped up to the challenge and created and were very novel in how they dealt with substrate shortages. I'll share some of those with you. And then we'll end talking about some sustainability initiatives and how the growing media sector kind of fits into that realm. So looking back in preparation for today, I went back and looked at the first Grove Pro series from 3 years ago, or 4 years ago, I guess it was. And this is the title slide I began with, looking ahead. All right, well, today, after I put thought into what message do I want to share today? What do I hope to relay to you? And here's what we're going to do. We're going to start by looking backwards. And this is something that I've always appreciated from a historical context, but I do truly believe that we as an industry, both growers, academic, USDA, everyone associated with floriculture and horticultural innovations, we have learned so much and we have encountered so many challenges in the past that I do feel as though looking back gives us a perspective about how to move forward in some very difficult times or in times of prosperity for doing that. So with that said, I want to start by this. One of the things that I've learned in the last 14 years as a professor, but also in 20 years having studied soilless growing media, is there has been a tremendous amount of redundancy in a lot of the research that has and is being done. And that is by no particular fault of any one or any individual institution, but there are papers and lots of funded works from 2 or 3 decades ago that are very similar to topics being funded today. And that discourages me, but it also encourages me that, hey, I can break that circle. I can try, and my colleagues are already doing this, to actually let's push forward and advance and stop doing the same things over and over as problems reoccur decade after decade. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why I feel it's important to look back so that we actually let's move forward now, and let's not repeat the mistakes of the past or just repeat the same work over and over. So what did I do? I went to my bookshelves to start with, and I truly think that we are already upon the answers. We already have the answers to many of the questions and problems that we have today, and maybe even the innovations. And I took this photo of one of the bookshelves just here behind me, but here's where I went first. Notice the green books. Grower Talk from the 1960s all the way through the 70s and early 80s did I delve through, which was a wonderful lesson in history in and of itself of this industry. But that's where I took a first stab. The other thing I did is, if your office looks anything like mine, this is the stack of trade articles, trade magazines that I have just over the last couple of years. And I went back through them and what are the trends? What are the problems? What are the innovations? So from that, I got so much inspiration, quite frankly, for some of the things to share with you today. And I encourage you maybe to do that as well. All right. Other things I did, I looked back through peat industry reports and peat proceedings and peat texts relative to horticulture and peat's role in growing media to try and better understand and represent the role that peat has had, is having, and will have in the future. So this was also a very valuable lesson. And some of the things I picked up from Floral magazines, Grower Talk magazines. Look at the topics, ladies and gentlemen. Charting one's way through the maze of soil mixes. Does that sound familiar? That was in 1983. Modifying container mediums to combat economic change. Does that sound familiar? That was in 1980 something, maybe even 70s. More to mix cost than meets the eye. Same thing, some of the same topics. What's this? Space age superabsorbent polymers. Space age. Now, we are very commonly familiar with polymers today as far as water retention, but this was like, oh my gosh, this is crazy new technology. And then here on the right, for Pete's sake, it's an excellent medium. And that was March of 1983. Folks, going back and some of the same problems and the realizations is really quite interesting. All right, now, also before I kick off, I want to not just learn from the past, but share with you about learning from the best. And I am absolutely honored beyond belief and proud to have been mentored by Dr. Robert Wright at Virginia Tech, who, among other things, is known for, in his career, developing the Virginia Tech a liquid fertilizer system for container-grown plants, basically the pour-through method. And he also was really one of the first to kick off the use of wood fiber in growing media. And that's kind of taking everything he learned and me just propelling that forward is my hope. The second, dear friend and mentor and absolute brother of mine in life, as close as we could possibly get, Bill Fontenot, who's retired now from NC State University a year and a half ago. But Bill, of course, cut his teeth, so to speak, in the 1980s when no one was talking about growing media. And he started to put numbers and analyses on how to be standardized in creating growing media and how to formulate them. And of course, he went on to begin the horticultural substrates lab that I am now the director of. And then last but not least, Ted Bilderback, who was innovative and one of the best, undoubtedly one of the top nursery extension specialists in all the United States, if not the world. And Ted spent a lot of his decades talking about bark. All right, the bark ages and bark knows best and bark in trouble. And he talked about pine bark over and over and over and bark. And finally, I was at a nursery last fall and I finally understand now what he meant about bark. And there it is. That's a testament to my dear friend, Ted. All right, so that's a bit of the past, but how do we move forward from all that they contributed to substrate development, substrate science? How do we move forward? Well, if you have not had a chance, I encourage you. This book is downloadable. You can find it online, The Future of Agriculture. And in that, there's a section on controlled environments and what some of the projections are about what's going to happen in the future. And we, of course, are such a huge part of agriculture and the leaders in controlled environment, horticulture and agriculture, that it's fundamental, I think, that we pay attention to that. Other initiatives from soil to soilless, the urgency of a sustainable farming revolution, and how as soil quality and volumes, arable land continue to decrease, how do we best optimize that from a soilless perspective? A lot of really neat forward thinking. Some of it I agree with, others I don't, and that's okay too. All right, so growing media in the news, really quickly. It's been a heck of a year. The last 18 months, last 12 months really, the issue of peat extraction and use, the use of peat moss in horticulture, the use and value of growing media has now reached the ultimate highlight of politics and public spotlight. And it was the honor of my professional careers to be invited by members of Congress to speak last fall about what is growing media and what is the value of peat and other growing media to agriculture. And that was a wonderful, that was a wonderful opportunity to share. And the congressman's staff has reached back out, and we're supposed to kick off another formal briefing on growing media in the near future. They have promised that, so I'm excited. All right, a week after that in November, I was fortunate to join members of the Canadian Sphagnum Peat Moss Association to go to Ottawa to speak with members of the members of Parliament in Ottawa about peat moss and its role in agriculture, both in Canada, but certainly for us in the United States. This is the first time this has ever really, on a governmental level, actually gained attention. And then the following week, there was actually a meeting in Brussels at the European Parliament, also discussing the role that soilless growing media has in the future of sustainability and restoration and feeding the world. All right, so folks, it's really it's wonderful, quite frankly, to see the attention that has had. All right, there's also been some other popular press media, some good, some neutral, some a bit negative, from New York Times to the BBC to National Geographic. There's some narratives through this that have been cherry picked, but most things in the media can be. And I'll just leave that there. But I do encourage anyone who's interested to read about what's being publicized to the public sector about peat and about growing media. So we're finally having a voice, and we need to take advantage of that voice to make sure people are properly educated about what we do and how horticulture plays a major role in that. State of the growing media industry. All right, current future concerns of peat. I chose to not spend a lot of time in the short amount of time we have today to discuss all of the pros and cons and issues and current thought processes about peat and sustainability. But I will say this, just to reaffirm that peat is not running out. It is not scarce. Peat harvest and peat availability is directly impacted by wet summers and climatic events that prevent it from being harvested. So that's why there's shortages, not because it's running out. I will say that I am supportive of the peat industry, and my colleagues in the peat industry know that. And I can say that they are doing as much as any other growing media component or any other entity in horticulture to improve sustainability efforts, and that I've seen it with my own eyes. So they are working to do that. Development and adoption of new products. I'm going to give you a list and show you a lot of kind of quick fire new products that I'm seeing entering the market. But that, of course, is in response to the innovation that's come after this pandemic, or as we like to call it, the plantdemic, and all of the innovations that have also come due to challenges like the fuel crisis in Europe and a number of other things. Adoption of new cultivation management strategies. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes relative to stratifying or reducing peat usage, or also by using other new or novel components. Substrate supplies are mostly available right now. That was not true a year ago. Coconut coir is abundant, all right? Peat is for the most part abundant, except for raw peat. The peat producers still are selling little, if any, raw peat. They're selling blends and mixes. And vermiculite also seemingly is also very tough to get for a lot of people as well. And there are reasons for that that go beyond the amount of time we have to discuss any of those two issues. A return to pre-pandemic products. This is something I was curious to see if it would happen, and now I am seeing it happen. And that is certain soil or substrate companies that are reverting back to their old recipes now that components are readily available. And when they had to pivot and use wood fiber or other non-peat or other materials during the pandemic shortages, now they're reverting back. I'm also curious as to whether growers will revert back to wanting their old mixes and managing the way they used to, or if they turn the page and now it's what they've now adopted is now what the future is. So that's kind of still a question mark as to how much will return to pre-supply chain issue past. A greater need for basic training and technical support. As more new people enter the plant production horticultural industry, as more substrates change compositions and more wood fiber and biochar materials and other fibrous organic and inorganic materials, the more that they introduce to our new mixes, then management changes. Basic principle cultural practices that we've known for 50, 60 years now have to be rethought, retweaked, and be trained to identify those problems. And I'm seeing a lot of that, and a lot of the substrate companies also are expressing their technical teams are pretty stretched in the number of questions that are seemingly pretty basic a few years ago, but now it's a new demographic we're having to educate. And then, of course, there's a great focus on sustainability within our industry. And here I just show the cover of a greenhouse grower from November of 2022, kind of the state of the growing media industry, where I talk about a few of these things a bit more in detail. So now let's talk about some challenges, and I'll get to some photographs and some other stuff that hopefully piques your interest. Geopolitical crises around the world, both current and what's to come, which seemingly there always is something to come, are greatly affecting everything in our lives, and that does not exclude growing media and raw material acquisition and sourcing and transportation from around the world. Increasing global weather patterns are affecting peat extraction. As I mentioned a moment ago, wet summers are the primary culprit as to why peat producers cannot extract the volumes that they need or that they want. The spread of misinformation and cherry-picked data that drives corporate or political agendas. And that happens way too often. And I suppose in life, we're all guilty of cherry-picking things that fit our narrative or that fit our desire to think something. But we have to sort through that and rely on fact-based data as much as possible, especially when it comes to sustainability and what's more or less or least sustainable economically, environmentally, socially, et cetera. Lack of trained professionals. I mean, we're still begging for people to enter the horticultural market, and certainly in the soils substrates markets, there aren't many students trained in soilless substrate science, and hopefully there'll be more of that actually can support all of these great companies who are making products. The war in the Ukraine and the closing of Russia and Belarus, of course, has rippled through Europe, and that has had effects here from fertilizers to plastics and certainly even to peat and to other growing media components. And then lastly, I would say one of the big challenges is the discovery of issues and threats of peat alternatives. Because sometimes we can get so focused on how peat is bad or how peat is not good and not think about what are the true consequences of the alternatives that we are proposing to supplement peat or to as an alternative to peat. And everything is not perfect, okay? We'll talk about a little of that in a few minutes, but issues and threats about peat alternatives. All right, some advancements in growing media products. Now, this is not too far afield from all the work being done with NASA and research on Mars. We may get there sometime. I'm not sure in my career I'll see substrates for Mars, but hey, I'm happy to volunteer for that. By no means advocating peat-free as an overall theme, but you cannot deny its presence in the media, its presence in print, its presence in webinars. It is an initiative, okay? An initiative by many. And what I will say to this, ladies and gentlemen, folks, every component has some negative aspect, some negative sustainability aspect on the environment. We as humans have a negative impact as opposed to if we weren't here, which I'm glad we are, okay? So first and foremost, the reason for peat-free can be varied by the individual, okay? And again, that's a whole nother conversation at the time, all right? But let me say this. Can we be peat-free eventually? I think the answer is yes. Can we be peat-free tomorrow? Unequivocally, no. Can we be peat-free next year? Unequivocally, without doubt, absolutely no. It takes a transition. We have so much to learn and innovate before we can ever hope to reduce drastically the percent of peat we're using, much less completely stop using it on the professional or even the retail side. All right, and a lot of countries are enabling long-term transition projects to be partially peat-free by 2030 or 2040. All right, so if one has an objective to be peat reduced or peat free, set a realistic time frame and also understand that you have to maybe pay more or be innovative in R&D to make that happen. Okay, so with that said, how much do we really know about peat substitute materials? Well, that's a whole question in and of itself. Let's take a look at a few. Of course, I'll start with wood, where I've spent most of my life, and I went straight to the bookshelves. And with my graduate students and I, we have delved through a lot of wood forestry, wood pulp, paper science, literature, and texts. And that is where we learn about how to process and utilize wood components. How do they break down? What are their chemistries? How do we physically manipulate their particles, grind them up? So I went back to the literature. All right, so what's old is new again. Look at this, bringing the forest into the greenhouse. I absolutely love this from West Virginia Ag. This was in 1970. Pine sawdust and soil amendment, and we think wood fiber is new. It's not, even though that's pine sawdust. Oh, look at this, shredded pine cones. My goodness. Well, let me show you the ultimate, bringing the forest into the greenhouse. That's really not what I'm referring to, but there are a lot of pine trees now in greenhouses growing plants. All right, just a few of what we're learning about wood products. And I'm skipping over all of what I've talked about before, and there are a lot of different areas and avenues to discuss, only a couple. One, with help of Dr. Nissa Palatovich at University of New Hampshire, who's a plant pathologist, we published a paper recently on several years of work that actually looked at disease occurrence in media containing wood components on floricultural crops and vegetable seedlings. And what we found is that there's no increased disease pressure, but there's actually more evidence of some suppressiveness. So thanks to a USDA grant, we've actually got the next 2 years of a full slate of projects to delve into this more and understand more about that substrate, wood product, peat, disease interface, and what we might suspect or have some more confidence in about disease suppressiveness. Continue to get lots of reports from growers about the positivity of some wood products and the fibrous materials, particularly, and their enhancement of root growth, even for propagation, not just for seedling or finishing crops, but even for propagation. So that's always a good thing. Wood products and grow bags. Now, this is just one example, and I neither support nor publicly promote any product or any company, but this happens to be one of Klaus Endowment's, and I'm sure there are others, companies that have lay flat grow bags that now are containing higher and higher percent woods. And right now, wood products. And right now, primarily fruit vegetable cultivation, but potentially more coming in the future. Sourcing. This is a big project I'm just launching. We're pretty well versed in the on the East Coast with what species we can use and what resources of forest products we can access to produce wood fiber and other wood products for substrates. But the West Coast is basically like the wild, wild West, pun intended, in that we don't know very much. So I've partnered with a group in Northern California that recently, if you remember, 2 years ago, had a almost 2 million acre fire that lasted for weeks and devastated so much land in Northern California. So I've partnered with some folks there, and we're actually going to take the fire killed trees and try to process and utilize that for wood fiber production for the state of California and the West Coast. And then also forest thinnings. One of the things California is doing to try to limit the pressure of fires and to limit the intensity of fires when they do have them is by thinning the understory and doing more prescribed burnings. So this is a forest unthinned on the left, and I turn around literally 180 degrees, and that's the forest behind me that was thinned. All right, and what they estimate is about 20 tons of conifer, pine, spruce, other conifer species, 20 tons of biomass per acre. That's more wood fiber than we can possibly imagine when you think about the millions of acres for this. And I'm very proud to have a fairly new PhD student, Jack Bobo, on this project, as well as some other aspects of wood fiber development. Some other things, then we'll move on to other technologies really quickly. Wood fiber refining technologies. North America, the United States, is behind the rest of the world as far as companies that have installed or offering wood products to substrate manufacturers. We are behind the rest of the world, and that is quickly changing. And one of the things that's helping to change that is growers are demanding more and different wood products as options for their operations, and for a variety of positive reasons why. These, and again, I'm not promoting any of these, but in Tapa, Promeco, Schulte, hammer mills, these are all different types of wood refining equipment that specialize for wood fiber for growing media. There's also Meadows Mills, which is the hammer mill I have here at NC State. Here's Klextral, which is a screw extrusion technology used a lot by growing media. And the bottom photograph is a newly installed Klextral facility in the North Island of New Zealand when I was there visiting Dalton's company back in July. And then Premier Tech, just to our north in Canada, now offers a wood fiber machine that you can buy, or if one chooses to, and have it installed and make wood fiber right on site. So there are a lot of advances that will help create more products and more suppliers of wood products. And then just for kicks and giggles, my substrate processing lab here at NC State is a hammer milled system, and I've talked about that a lot in the past, but that SPARC, the Substrate Processing and Research Center here at NC State, where I spend many of my nights and days just for fun. Lastly, before we move on really quick, I must give again a little nod to Young's Plant Farm in Auburn, Alabama, who 12, 14 years ago had the initiative and the drive to install, to start harvesting their own trees on the back of their property, 30 plus acre greenhouse. They've got lots of timber. This was last October. I visited the youngs and had a wonderful visit. And this was them harvesting, and they mill it right on site. And then they age it in their super sacks, and they've been supplementing peat moss for 30 to 40% for about 12 plus years. All right, innovators certainly in how they've done that. Are forest products truly part of the answer to the future needs and demands of the growing media industry? Well, I don't know the answer of that, but when I was in New Zealand, I'm driving and boom, I see a rainbow over this stand of Pinus radiata, and I'm thinking it must be the pot of gold at the end. I'm joking about that, but that was a pretty cool photo. Other innovations as we're moving through here, substrate stratification, something that Dr. Jeb Fields and Jim Owen at USDA and LSU respectively have innovated in the last 5 years and published a lot of works on stratified substrates for nutrient and water management and optimization. But the big thing I'm interested in is how does it reduce peat? And Jeb just published this paper a month ago, and it talks about stratified substrates, and that's more expensive peat based on top, and then different layers or percentages of cheaper materials on the bottom. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is something we've done here at NC State to a small extent, not anything like what Jeb and Jim and others have done, but looking at floral crops as well as berry crops and how much can we reduce peat usage and what is the strategy for doing that. This is peat on top and bark on the bottom. And then one of the innovators in this was our good friends and innovators at Rockwell Farms. And this was one of the head growers at Rockwell Farms, and they've been doing this practicing at their own greenhouse to utilize coarse pine wood, pine bark, and even disc refined pine fiber to try to supplement or to reduce their peat usage. So that's a pretty cool thing happening. Other thing, container mulching, a big thing in Europe. I think it will come here more eventually, but top dressing containers is becoming increasingly popular because one, it's water retention. So that means better water management during crop production, but maybe most critically is water retention during post-production shelf life. So it increases the time to wilt for plants sitting on a shelf. All right, the nursery industry has been mulching containers for weed control for years, and aesthetics, of course, could also be a purpose for that in the floricultural world. But Klassmann-Delman offers a product, as do other companies. I've seen it dating back to IPM in 2018, companies that offer these top dressing mulch products. And you can go to the Klassmann website and actually they give calculations for what depth of mulch is needed by container size. A lot of inline mix units at grower operations can be retrofitted to have a spout at the end that actually dumps the mulch on top so that it is a continuous system, as most growers have a potting line system. So that's something else to consider there. Other container coverings, this was Chris from Grower Talks Acres Online just in February, about a month ago, reported about these Qualitree Q trays. And these trays are innovative in that they have a plastic covering over the surface, which in many ways acts like that layer of mulch I just provided, that I just showed you examples of. So really neat things in the surface covering world. To try to address how that water is leaving and how it's being retained in these systems, we've been spending about 2 years developing a lysimetry or a load cell system here at our lab at NC State, where we can actually measure individual plants on these load cells or balances, and then actually calculate time to wilt or time between irrigation, or with and without surface coverings, how can we get post-harvest wilt extension for that? So a lot of really cool stuff we're doing with this new lysimetry system here. And then the last section is substrates for propagation. Now, I know I'm going quickly, but again, just kind of thought-provoking. You know, Jiffy has been a leader in preformed and young plant substrates for many years, but there's also resin-based materials, fiber cells, of course, GrowCoon, which you likely have heard of. GrowFoam is another. Here's a stabilized organic substrate based on TUV bio-based certified. Biopolymer substrates, a lot of these are peat-free, all right? A lot of these are organic, certified organic, or at least listed organic. Plugs, peat foam. I've heard a lot of publicity around peat foam. Also, hemp grow cubes. Now, is this innovative? I think so. Is it commercialized? Maybe not to the scale that you can buy it readily, but it's on the horizon. I think it's on the horizon. And the last thing about young plants, RHP out of the Netherlands, which is heavily the biggest certification board organization in Europe for European producers and products. They actually now have a certified plug program that they've tested young plugs and young plant substrates for more certified standardized systems. So in case you're aware of that. And then other hot topics, products, bio-based refining technology. All right, we're going to see this. There's a grant given at Stony Brook in New York using biomass waste to create fertilizers and hydrogels for young plant production. Same thing with Novarbo and 374 Water. These are innovative technologies taking waste materials and creating fertilizer solutions or raw materials that are toxin-free and could be substrate components. Others are carbon-based technologies, biochar, activated carbon, hydrocarbon, Pure Life. I don't endorse Pure Life. I have their products. I've looked at them. A lot of other biochar products as well, and a lot of continued interest in these carbon sink, carbon credit-based materials that can have long-term life in substrate usage, repeatability over and over because they do not degrade. A lot of discussion around biochar products. Perennial herbaceous biomass. This is all miscanthus grass that has been extruded, disc refined, or hammer milled. Different ways of processing bamboo and hemp fiber, hemp biomass to create new products. This is where so much innovation and so much attention is being focused now as the best options for peat alternatives. Recycled newspapers and cardboard and other recycled rock wool and stone wool materials are finding their way back into loose field mixes to, again, stretch and extend peat supplies, or maybe even to identify a new use for some of these materials. So a lot of innovations in those world. And then the last couple of things on sustainability. These are the 17 goals laid out by the UN about sustainability initiatives, and a lot of product development around growing media components and other inputs in horticulture focus on how they address these different aspects of the UN sustainability goals. And I offer this because people are often carbon tunnel vision, and I love this when I saw it, because people often only think about carbon emissions relative to the grand scope of sustainability. When looking around this chart, you can see there's 12, 15 different things that have to be considered when you truly assess the sustainability of a product or a process, a program, or a business. And I think that's something that's going to be more and more aware of in the future. And part of that outline, and I'm not going to go through these by any means, but this is some of the structured format that growing media companies are implementing to give thorough assessment of currently used materials, peat, coconut coir, bark, rock wool, and also new materials, wood fiber, hemp fiber, whatever it may be. They're going through this litany of tests to truly understand its impact, business-wise, economic, socially, and environmentally. And this is something we all have to do more and more of. And again, just a bit of props, and many companies have great initiatives on sustainability, but Kekula BVB has a brilliant website where they talk about how they are truly implementing these initiatives into their product development for their growers. And then the industry sustainability initiative initiated and funded and supported and led by AFE is truly going to be revolutionary for us in the United States, and I think a model globally to show what can and should be happening in regards to sustainability efforts. All right, so in summary, initiatives and goals, and I'm going to speak for myself, but I hope and I think many of my colleagues will agree. Understand where we have been and learn from it. I think the answers are there. All right, the folks who came before us were smart. All right, maybe smarter than we are in some ways because they had to figure it out and just didn't look for answers on their phone. So let's learn from them and move forward. Let's stop spinning in circles, Brian. Let's stop doing things over and over that we should have moved on from. And I think there's opportunities now with substrate science to take what we've learned and move on and not just keep repeating ourselves. Apply existing and new technologies to substrate science. And I have some brilliant colleagues and some brilliant friends who are really doing some really neat innovative work. And I'm just tagging along and adding and contributing however I can. Work more closely with growers and manufacturers to commercialize new substrates, particularly wood products or agro-bio-based products. All right, how do we commercialize them? Let's move it from the bench top, which we as scientists can make anything work. Let's move it from a small trial, even at a grower operation. What are the barriers to entry to actually let's push this forward? And if we want to have peat alternatives truly at the volumes needed to switch, then let's be able to do that. And then lastly, match new substrate components to specific crops. If we have a bagasse from Louisiana, or we've got cotton stalk fiber or hemp fiber, and it's only biostable long enough to support the physical properties in a container for 4 weeks, well, let's only grow lettuce or 4-week crops. Let's not expect it to have a shelf. Let's not expect those highly degradable materials to grow cyclamen. All right, so let's match the substrates to the crops that were being grown. Funding for substrate science, and I'm biased, I will admit that, you all know it, but funding for substrate science research is as fundamental to this industry in regards to sustainability as any other area of emphasis. And I truly do believe that, not just with the peat circumstances around the world, but just innovation and how soilless growing media is the future. Transitioning to lower peat usage will take time. It is not automatic. It will take time, 10 years, 20 years, I do not know. But if we look at Europe as a model, it would be more than a decade for sure. Be aware and willing to modify production practices, and growers have proven resilient in the last 2 to 3 years to make changes when needed, even when before they did not want to or were less encouraged to. They are now. Novel and innovative substrates will continue to enter the market. Look at the young plant products I just showed you. Look at all the biocarbon or biopolymer based materials. It's really exciting to see what's coming. Know what you're growing and how to grow it. And I say that because the substrate truly matters. So not just know what you're growing, but how to grow as a business person. Know what you're growing and how to grow and evolve such that you can adapt and adopt new products as they come around. And anyone can evolve, and this newspaper clipping proves it, that even brain can, I'm a la Brian, can evolve. All right, so keep that in mind. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I certainly acknowledge the American Floral Endowment for the opportunity, also for the extraordinary support of these companies and many others that have contributed to my work and those of many others. Because in applied horticulture, we truly are solving problems and creating opportunities at the same time. And for that, I am immensely proud. So past, present, and future to me means progress. And I hope that also means economic and environmental sustainability and social sustainability for us all. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Hey, thank you so much, Dr. Jackson, for your presentation. I'd like to open it up for the Q&A now. And we've had some questions come in. All right. From Guatemala, they are asking, is there a wood fiber material with similar properties to compressed cocoa coir, 3/4 5-kilogram blocks, something ready to use, no need to mix with something else?
I don't know the answer to that right off the top of my head. I think I know the Europeans have more product offerings when it comes to wood products, certainly more than in the United States, and there's some good ones in the United States. But as far as equal properties or similar properties ready to use at 100%, that I am unaware of. Currently, whatever form wood products are available or delivered in, whether it's compressed bales or loose fill, they're meant to still be supplementing with peat or coconut or other materials at a percentage, not as 100%, at least not yet.
Okay, thank you. Can you rename the supplier of the lay flat grow bags with the wood?
That was Endowment. The one particular one I showed was Klossman.
Okay. And then from the same person, Pinstrup, they offer retail in the US?
No, only professional.
Okay.
I'm getting good at these short answers. This is unlike me.
You're doing great. All right, so Mary asks, the EU is still on track to completely phase out peat in the next few years. Is there a media mix component you'd expect most growers to switch to when the legislation finally gets passed?
Oh, that's a great question. Within the EU, to my understanding, it is still on a country by country basis as to how they're handling regulatory pressures and or goals about peat reduction. So it's not a broad EU decision. It is on a country by country basis. Several countries do have timed initiatives in place for certain percentage of peat reduction, and some even maybe total transition away from peat. There's a lot of thought that wood products, if they evolve and continue to innovate, that they have the best potential to holistically fill the volumes in the demand of growing media, coupled with the potential decrease in peat usage. And it's not that wood products are the best. It's not that they don't have their own problems or issues. It's that the location of wood products globally is so broad that no other material can kind of match that. So wood products will certainly play a huge role in that. Coconut core will continue to expand, and that industry has grown tremendously in the last 3 to 5 years. So I think that'll continue to fill more of that volume left behind as well.
Okay, thank you. The next question they ask, sugarcane press mood has an issue of high EC. Can it be washed to reduce EC as it has small particle size?
That's a great question. I've only worked with sugarcane on a minimal basis, and it has a very high degradation rate because of just the chemical constituents of that fiber, plus all those easily digestible carbohydrates that microbes attack. So I am unaware of washing technologies or applications that may lower that. So I'm unsure about that. The one I know who works the most, or at least has most access to sugarcane bagasse and other products, would be Dr. Jeb Fields at LSU. So I'll put him on the line for that if he wants to reach out to Jeb Fields.
Thank you. This question asks, could you please tell us more about your lysimeter project?
Okay, so in short, my PhD student, Brian Schulker, who's been with me for almost 5 years, we've spent the past 2.5 years taking these load cells, which are individual balances, and in short, you see the layout in the greenhouse that we have, and they're all linked to a computer system such that each individual load cell can record the weight of the plant placed on it every minute, every 5 minutes, so we can track in real time the gravitational water loss. And we're doing more emphasis on not re-irrigation. There's a lot of work in the last 20 years on gravimetric water loss and when to re-irrigate, but we're focusing it more on being able to categorize and quantify evaporative water loss from different substrates, different container types, alternative plastic containers, how to use surface coverings to reduce water loss or mitigate that so it extends the wilt time and a post-production shelf life. So we're doing more of tracking where the water's leaving as opposed to irrigation-based work. But we're very happy to have that facility, and thanks to Brian Schulker, it's something that's going to be a tool for our lab for a very long time.
Yeah, that looked really cool. This isn't a question, but it's just a comment. They think that geopolitical change will help in the development of locally or regionally sourced substrates.
Well, I think that's a very valid point. I think the pandemic showed the opportunity for local, less reliance on international products, simply as it relates to trade issues, transportation issues, and then, of course, more of a mentality of building local products as it relates to economic development. I think that I would agree with that.
Okay. Some other questions for you. There seem to be different ways that wood products are made. Are there differences in them?
There are. Even the 4 or 5 equipment companies that I briefly mentioned that offer wood refining technologies, there are 4 major ways in which wood products globally are made today, 3 primarily, I suppose. They do make different products. One is not better than the other. They're different. They serve different functions. A disc refined product, the really, really woolly fiber, does not have the structural support that a hammer milled product was. It doesn't have the same structural support or structural integrity that extruded product does. Doesn't mean it's worse. It treats water differently. All right, so everything has a different role, and that is what's been exciting to see the development of wood products, is the fact that none of them are better than the other. All right, none of the commercial ones. It's how they're being used and how they're being managed, and it's a product line, just like peat and perlite and all the different components have a product line. The wood products are too. Now, there's still a lot to work through. The short answer is yes, they are different, but scientifically, we haven't been able to quantify those differences yet. A lot of the companies know internally, but they keep that internal. So we're going to work to open that up a bit and show to the world how these products are a bit different.
Thank you. What is your advice for a company involved in development of a new substrate?
I think the first is to, for whatever metrics you are assessing its feasibility, and that is, of course, not only will it grow a plant in the system that you're aiming for, meaning shelf life or degradation of that mix, does it work in different size containers? What is the regionality of this? Is the scalability of the raw components enough such that it's long-term stable as far as quantities of materials to make that new product? I would also say to always don't compare something new to what you're used to. You might use that peat mix or whatever the old traditional one was, use it as a reference, but treat new materials as their own entities. It's apples and oranges. So you always have a reference point to compare something new to something old, but always know you can tweak systems so much to make something successful. So keep that in mind and treat new materials, new mixes as their own entity, at least until you understand them more.
Thank you. So we have one more question for you, unless any more roll in. Is there a recommended web or university website where you can find more information about substrates?
This is something some colleagues and I have dealt with and worked on, at least identified that it's a need in the last several years. And there's not a collective one that I am familiar with. My website here at NC State has everything I have ever published in trade articles or scientific articles, plus a lot of supplemental articles on substrates. So my website has everything that I've ever done, but a collective source that growers or industry can go to learn about all things substrate, technology, innovation, development. I do not know of one, but it's something that some colleagues of mine are aware of, and we're going to work to better provide that resource to our constituents, to our growers.
Yeah, that would be a cool resource, but I'm glad you at least have something. And then this person asks, what are the top 3 books to read about innovation of substrates, and what will we be using in the future?
Ooh. Send me an email. I'll have to think about that one because, yeah, that's a great question. And off the cuff, I don't know of a textbook that's going to have all of those answers as far as what substrates are of the future. But what this does provide, and what all the previous information from our predecessors in industry and academics and USDA do provide, is a roadmap to how to solve problems. And I think that's what I'm spending more time looking back about how to solve problems more so than exactly what the answers are. But whoever that is, feel free to email me and I'll send you a list of everything I know substrate wise that's in publication.
What would you consider are the most important properties or measurements to consider when assessing a new growing media material?
I think first would be its chemical properties. Okay, so is it toxic in some way? Is the salt level too high? Is the pH too high or low? What do you need to do to mitigate the chemistry? Are there chemicals in that raw material, assuming that it's organic, that could be negative to plants? So first step is the chemistry a problem? If not, then the second big thing I would look at is stability. So what is the expected degradation rate of that material at different particle sizes, perhaps, in a greenhouse, fertilized, high temperature, moist environment. Because you can have a raw material that's perfect with physical properties, chemical properties, pH, everything is just on point. But if there's not a way to, if it degrades within weeks, then it makes it tough to make it viable. So one of the other, dreams of mine, and I think it would be the most revolutionary technical advantage in maybe the history of substrates, is an economical method, mechanical, chemical, whatever, that could stabilize physically and chemically organic fibers that would increase their stability by decreasing their degradation rate, allowing for longer crop production, longer structural support. That would open up the door for so many organic fibers, from roadside grass clippings to storm debris to whatever, but we're not there yet. So right now, early chemistry, toxicity, and then just early, even 6, 8, 10-week biostability of that mix in a growing system. Those would be the first two things. And then, of course, lastly, if the volume, consistent, reliable volume of the raw material is not such that it can support the size of product you need, then that too is a great limitation.
Thank you. Okay, we have one last question here. Of your current research projects going on now, which of them excites you the most and shows the most promising results?
That's like asking you to pick your favorite child. I can't answer that. Anyone who's ever met me, I don't have a job. I live and breathe this stuff. I am absolutely just fascinated by it, from the California project and the potential impact there, to the water work that we're doing, to the wood chemistry. I am obsessed with it, and I love it, love it, love it. And I wish I had more time. That's my only limitation, is time. But thank you for that question. But I don't have one over the other.
That's awesome that you have so many things you can love.
That's true. And most of it revolves around wood and water. So I guess that's the
that's your passion.
That's the big sector.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Jackson. So in closing, thank you for joining us today for another session of AFE's Grow Pro webinar series. Join us on April 18th at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for our next session on fertilizer options for greenhouse growers. Visit endowment.org/GrowPro to see our full list of upcoming sessions, past webinar recordings, other grower-related resources, and research reports, all of which are available to you for free, thanks to industry support. We also ask that you please complete the brief survey about today's session, where you can suggest additional topics and help us continue to improve these webinars. Thank you again for joining us.